Somehow, the number of world title reigns Nature Boy Ric Flair has enjoyed is still somehow a total mystery and has no clear defining answer. In a pseudo-sport where title switches can be ignored and history can be revised for storyline or political purposes, the exact number of Ric Flair's world title wins is a confusing one. Until now. I'm James. This is ListMania Wrestling, and we are here to finally give you the definitive number of times Nature Boy Ric Flair has legitimately held a world title. Let's start at the beginning. Woo! This first title reign not only proved to be a huge letdown for Flair personally, but would also prove to be the most controversial, as this reign saw Flair lose and then regain his title several times before being officially recognised as losing the NWA World Heavyweight title to Harley Race on June 10th, 1983 in St. Louis. So Flair lost via the old back suplex, but Flair forgot to lift his shoulders while Harley lifted his routine. We will get into why Rick had so many unrecognised wins and losses in the second half of this video, but for now let it be known that instead of some huge arena in a major metropolitan city, Flair instead defeated Dusty Rhodes for his first NWA World Heavyweight Championship in front of not that many fans at all in Kansas City Memorial Hall for Central States Wrestling, with Lou Thesz no less acting as guest referee. The location was political in nature, as the NWA's main office was based in Kansas City, but neither Flair or Rhodes were big names in the area. Rhodes was upset at being asked to drop the title, and Flair struggled for acceptance in certain territories as champion during his first reign. For Rick, the title win was like Central States Wrestling's television production values, hugely disappointing. The first Starrcade, subtitled A Flair for the Gold, Gene Kiniski this time as special guest referee, the classic cage match. The match had a chance of not happening at all actually, as Vince McMahon had reportedly offered Harley Race $250,000 to no-show the event and leave the NWA for the WWF. Race turned down Vince's offer and instead played his part, reluctantly it has to be said, in passing the torch to Ric Flair. After putting $25,000 bounty on Flair's head, Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater put Flair out of wrestling forever with a pile driver, before Flair made a triumphant return in the build-up to the first ever Starrcade, emanating from Greensboro, North Carolina. Flair would defeat Race via pinfall and hold the belt for actually not that long, as he dropped the belt back to Harley on March 20th, 1984 in Wellington, New Zealand, in a title change that was apparently not sanctioned by the NWA and was not recognised by the organisation until many years after the fact. Harley hadn't shot on Flair, and it wasn't a mistake by the referee, but in fact it is now believed that there was collusion between Ric Flair, Harley Race and local NWA New Zealand promoter Steve Rickard to book a title switch on the snide to help boost attendance in the country. After Race defeated Flair for the belt without the NWA's permission and became an 8-time world champion in the process, Nature Boy Ric Flair would quickly regain the belt a mere 3 days later, becoming a 3-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. At this point, we'll explain later. This isn't the only version of events, as according to contemporary reports from the Japanese Gong magazine, Flair in storyline lodged a complaint with the NWA alleging a fast count by the referee. Harley wore the belt the next day in Auckland before the NWA found in favour of Flair and returned the belt to him 2 days after losing it on the 22nd of March. Gong magazine also suggests that the title switch in Singapore was actually Flair, who hadn't lost the belt in the first place, defending his NWA title against Race, and that the Singapore bout actually took place on the 25th. A local Kallang Singapore poster printed some 6 weeks after the title changes also suggests that the belt never officially switched hands, as it describes Harley still as a 7-time world champion rather than 8. But as both the NWA and WCW eventually recognised the title switches in New Zealand and Singapore, we will go with them on this one. 18 days after Kerry Von Erich defeated Ric Flair in one of the most emotionally charged and memorable matches in the history of the business, in the memory of his recently deceased brother David, Kerry and Rick once again faced off in Yokosuka, Japan, in a 2 out of 3 falls match for the Domed Globe belt. Flair reversed a Von Erich roll-up for the clean pin, although Kerry's foot, he still had 2 feet at this point, was briefly touching the ropes, which should have indicated a break. Not only did Flair regain his belt, he won 2 of the largest trophies ever made. And no doubt in Japanese tradition he was not allowed to keep them. Kerry's NWA title reign was so short because he was a drug addict. Flair himself suggested that Kerry was meant to hold the title belt longer, but he missed his first ever scheduled NWA title defense, probably due to being messed up, maybe due to an injury, or just miscommunication, but probably the messed up bit. But the NWA got cold feet immediately. Flair, who was wrestling Harley Race in Singapore and Hong Kong, flew back to Japan, where the NWA had sent Kerry so he could drop the belt to Flair as soon as possible. This title win kicked off his longest reign as world champion, holding the belt for 793 days, before losing it to Dusty Rhodes on July 26, 1986. A mere 14 days after losing the NWA title, Flair regained it from Dusty Rhodes after attacking Dusty's injured leg throughout the match and causing the American Dream to pass out from the figure 4 leg lock. In 1985, Jim Crockett Jr. had become NWA president once again, and coupled with controlling a high number of NWA territories and attempting to go national, the NWA World title was mostly limited to being defended against other contracted Jim Crockett promotion wrestlers, thus making Ric Flair the last true travelling NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Rugged Ronnie Garvin infamously, and some may say bafflingly, defeated Ric Flair for the NWA title on an episode of NWA Worldwide Wrestling in Detroit, Michigan on September 25th, 1987. Garvin was a solid hand, as solid as stone you might say, but there were plenty of more worthwhile babyfaces on the roster, but no one bought Rugged Ronnie as World Championship material. During his 2-month reign on top of the tree, television ratings dropped 40%, which resulted in their syndicated television falling below the dying AWA's TV offerings, as well as women's pro wrestling parody, Glow. Live attendance died a death as well. It seemed that Ric Flair had a hand in choosing Ronnie Garvin as his brief successor before regaining the NWA title at Starrcade 87, because there were no other contenders who had been built up in this time frame. At least Rugged Ron would give Flair solid matches. The WrestleWar 1989 Music City Showdown saw the final of the legendary televised trio of matches between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. Steamboat would win the title at the Chi-Town Rumble on February 20th, 1989, with the second bout at Clash of the Champions 6 seeing Steamboat retain due to a contentious finish. Flair's foot was on the bottom rope while going down for the count, resulting in this second rematch. With Steamboat's leg injured, Flair reversed a body slam into an inside cradle for the win. Immediately after, one of the match judges, Terry Funk, attacked Rick after his challenge for a title match was rebuffed. With Ole Anderson handcuffed to El Gigante, Sting took the belt off Flair after reversing the figure 4 into a pin at the Great American Bash on July 7th, 1990. The following January, Flair got his revenge on Sting after both their heads collided and Flair fell on top of Sting. The referee didn't catch Flair pulling Sting's leg off the ropes, and the Nature Boy once again was the man. But the NWA World Heavyweight title wasn't all he won that night in New Jersey. Now, here's where things get complicated, but once again, it seems fairly undisputed that this one match consisted of 2 separate world title wins. When Flair defeated Sting on January 11th, he was concurrently recognised as the NWA champion and the WCW World Champion at the same time, with the big gold belt simultaneously representing both organisations. At some point while being recognised as the NWA Heavyweight Champion, Sting was also crowned the inaugural WCW World Champion as well. So when Flair defeated Sting, he won both titles while only holding one belt, the big gold belt to be precise. So how can we be so sure that the titles were not unified and therefore count as 2 separate reigns? Well, Ric Flair ended up losing the NWA Heavyweight title to Tatsumi Fujinami at the Starrcade in Tokyo Dome event on March 21st, 1991, but he didn't lose the WCW World Heavyweight title. Ergo, separate titles and 2 separate recognised World Championship reigns, but there's more to corroborate our theories. Flair would once again regain the NWA World title from Fujinami a couple of months later at the inaugural Super Bowl pay-per-view to once again become the undisputed World Heavyweight Champion. at least in the world of WCW, I guess. As further proof that the WCW and NWA titles were separate entities despite being represented by just one belt, Flair famously vacated the WCW title on July 1st, 1991, after WCW Executive Vice President Jim Herd famously told Flair to not bother defending it against Lex Luger, or anybody else, at the upcoming Great American Bash pay-per-view, and to just go home instead. The NWA title, however, was vacated on September 8th, over 2 months after Flair ended his WCW World title reign. Then, as we're sure most of you know, the big gold belt made its way onto WWF television, followed by a number of legal threats from WCW to have the belt returned. After being unable to legally show the big gold belt on the real world's champion on their television, the WWF just had him win their version of the World Heavyweight title instead. The one and only time the vacant WWF Championship was up for grabs in the Royal Rumble match itself, Nature Boy Ric Flair entered at number 3 and outlasted 29 other competitors, or 28 as British Bulldog had already eliminated Ted DiBiase before Flair had even got to the ring. With a tear in his eye, Ric Flair won the most star-studded Royal Rumble of them all, after last eliminating Sid Justice, after Hulk Hogan, who was being a little crybaby after being legally eliminated by Sid right beforehand, held onto Sid's arm from the outside. So the much less famous Ric Flair vs Randy Savage WWF match that was, according to Vince McMahon, so bad they had to film it twice, occurred some 5 months after Flair dropped the WWF strap to Macho Man at WrestleMania 8. At SummerSlam 1992 in Wembley Stadium, Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect liberally interfered in the Savage vs Ultimate Warrior WWF Championship co-main event, causing Savage's leg to be injured and the Ultimate Warrior to win the match, but just not the belt, via countout. Recorded just 2 days later and shown a couple of weeks after on WWF Primetime, Ric Flair got his shot and, thanks to outside interference from Razor Ramon, took advantage of Savage's bum wheel, rendering Macho Man unconscious, courtesy of the figure 4 leg lock. And why did Vince McMahon force him to retake the match twice? Well, it's because Vince didn't think Randy was selling his leg enough. He also hated the second attempt at their match, but he reluctantly aired it anyway. With Jim Herd long gone and Ric Flair being shunted down the WWF card after losing the belt to Bret Hart just a few weeks after winning it back from Savage, Flair made the move to return to WCW. Regarding the fate of the NWA World Heavyweight title though, after Flair vacated that particular title, it remained on hiatus for 11 months before migrating over to Japan, where Masahiro Chono and the Great Muta both had spells with the strap. Then Barry Windham won it on February 21st, 1993 at WCW Super Brawl 3 pay-per-view event. At this point, WCW's own heavyweight title was now the top title in the company, with the NWA title now relegated to second banana status, held in lower regard than WCW's world title but above WCW's United States title. Flair defeated Windham after a controversial pin shortly after Flair had applied the figure 4 leg lock, a reoccurring theme. The NWA World Heavyweight title was eventually renamed the World Heavyweight title. This was after a spell of being referred to simply as the Big Gold Belt, when WCW withdrew from the NWA on September 1st, 1993. The NWA withdrew recognition 2 weeks later on the 15th of September, before becoming the WCW International Heavyweight title later that year. So what would become the WCW International title will be addressed later on, but for now we're going to focus on Flair regaining WCW's top heavyweight title after putting his career on the line against Big Van Vader. For such a hard-hitting and memorable affair that saw Ric Flair defeat Vader with a roll-up, the bout was originally scheduled to be Vader defending against Sid Vicious. But Sid then got himself fired after the infamous scissors stabbing incident between he and Arn Anderson during a UK tour in late October, which very nearly turned into a straight murder for the amount of damage Sid had caused. As usual, WCW called upon reliable Rick to pull the company's chestnuts out of the fire, which of course he did with aplomb. Recognised by WCW but not by WWE for whatever WWE's opinion on the matter is worth, a double pin at Spring Stampede between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat on April 17, 1994 resulted in the WCW title being vacated. 4 days later, Flair pinned Steamboat after headbutting Steamboat in the solar plexus, i.e. Steamboat's tallywhacker, when Ricky went for a leapfrog. It looked super lame and was really a crappy finish to a long-forgotten WCW title win. And yes, winning a vacant title after you've been stripped of it does constitute a separate title reign, no arguments. So during Flair's reign as World Heavyweight Champion, Flair unified the former NWA World Heavyweight title, now known as the WCW International title, after WCW seceded from the NWA, after defeating Sting at Clash of the Champions 27 on June 23, 1994. Does the unifying of the titles give Flair a claim as holding the WCW International title? In our book, undoubtedly. For example, WWE lists Rob Van Dam as the final European champion and Chris Jericho as the final WCW World Champion before those belts were absorbed into other championships. You win the title, then you unify it, not the other way around. So Flair's WCW International title win counts as a separate reign, however short it may have been. Now the Hulk Hogan reign was upon WCW. Flair had lost the WCW World title, had been retired, had been told he was too old for the millionth time, and then returned to win the WCW World title at Starrcade 1995 by first defeating Sting and Lex Luger in a triangle match. Flair then defeated Randy Savage in a singles affair right afterwards thanks to interference from his new Four Horsemen faction teammates Brian Pillman, Chris Benoit, and the ever-reliable Arn Anderson. Randy Savage took the title back a few weeks later on WCW Nitro, only to lose it back to Flair a few weeks after that at the Super Brawl 6 pay-per-view. Historians point to the Flair vs Savage feud as the rivalry that sparked further growth in WCW as far as live attendance and ratings go, predating by 6 months the New World Order's debut that rocketed WCW to the undisputed #1 wrestling company in the world. More years, the more accusations that the Nature Boy was washed up. Ric Flair not only put his career on the line once again, he defeated Hulk Hogan in a first blood barbed wire steel cage match. At this point, Flair was one of only a couple of wrestlers left on the WCW roster who was still actually an effective ratings draw after years of screw finishes, the strangling of the Golden Goose Goldberg, and the NWO eventually outliving their usefulness. As for the first blood stipulation, well, Flair actually bled first, but the fans hadn't been properly apprised of the rules so they didn't realise. Then referee Charles Little Nate Robinson, the fanatical Flair fan in both storyline and real life, refused to count out Flair after Hogan dropped the atomic leg drop of doom on him. Then more nonsense involving Arn Anderson and David Flair, and a fast count on Hogan that saw the babyface Flair booed, and the heel Hogan sort of also booed as well. So the heel and babyface double turn that they had planned on didn't really go according to plan. At this stage of the game, nobody had any interest in jeering Flair, who, at this point in the game, was a national treasure, desperately wanting to play heel one more time for reasons only known unto himself. Ric Flair, now wearing a black t-shirt and business slacks, cleanly small packaged Jeff Jarrett in the middle of the ring in the midst of a feud with Jarrett, his son David Flair, and Vince Russo. WCW was a total embarrassment at this point, and when we say the world title changed hands every single week, we'd be downplaying the weeks where the title changed hands more than once a week, which was pathetically often. At least the bout had a spot of unintended comedy. After Flair's enemies beat him down as soon as the match was declared, Russo fell through the gap between the ring and the ramp while attempting to flee with the belt. Of course, this being WCW in the year 2000, Flair was stripped of the belt 7 days later on the subsequent Nitro by on and off-screen WCW writer Vince Russo, and he handed it to Jeff Jarrett on the grounds of, stupid storyline booking is really the answer. On the WCW Thunder episode between these two Nitros, Ric Flair fended off his useless son David, as well as Crowbar and Daphne, and then sort of half collapsed on the entrance ramp with no real explanation as to why. In what was half-heartedly meant to be yet another heart attack angle, and yes, Flair did have to pretend to have an aortic event a couple of years earlier, the following Nitro saw Russo, who had the power to do so apparently, gifting Jeff Jarrett the belt during a mock funeral for Flair's career. So that's how Flair lost the belt without losing it, but here's how he regained it for his final World Championship reign. Kevin Nash, who defeated Jeff Jarrett and Scott Steiner in a triangle match for the belt the day after the Nitro funeral episode of WCW Thunder, then went on the May 29th 2000 Nitro and handed the belt to Ric Flair. Quoting Nash's promo, "You never lost the belt. I don't feel right being the champion. As far as I'm concerned, until you lose this belt, Nature Boy, this belt's yours." And that was it. Flair's final world title run began after being handed the belt back. And if that wasn't bad enough, Flair's final world title run ended about an hour and a half later when Jeff Jarrett smashed one of his 6,000 guitars over Flair's head and guest referee Vince Russo counted the fall. To our count, that makes 21 title reigns, not 16, as WWE and WCW have claimed over the years. But there is more out there that we're going to revisit and see if they hold up to the scrutiny and can add them to our tally. No less than 4 of Ric Flair's contentious title wins occurred during his first reign as NWA World Champion. Dusty Rhodes, who wrestled as the not-so-mysterious masked Midnight Rider, was ineligible to win the NWA title on 2 counts. 1, he was storyline suspended from wrestling in Florida at the time, therefore he was not an eligible contender. And secondly, the Midnight Rider wore a mask, and at the time, masked wrestlers could not win the NWA World title, a rule that remained in place until 2008, when Blue Demon Jr. held the NWA title long after the NWA had ceased to be relevant. The most curious of these so-called phantom title changes. The local star from the Dominican Republic, Jack Veneno, actually fought Ric Flair twice in his home country, but the video footage of the first match somehow gets confused with the title change that actually occurred in the second match. The widely circulated and highly edited clips that are available from their first battle show the referee doing one of the following. Either the ref counts to 1 before standing up, or the ref counts 1 with the same 1 count being looped 3 times in a pathetic attempt to make it seem legit, before waving the match off. The point is that in the first match, Flair's shoulders were only pinned for a 2 count at best, despite what the wrestling promotion wanted their apparently very gullible fans to believe. Veneno celebrated with the NWA title belt. The fans assumed he'd won it as well, but even Veneno, who was a worker till the end, said that coming into the return match, he was in actual fact the challenger, not that he told local media that at the time, of course. No footage of the second match exists, but according to contemporary reports, Veneno walked to the ring with the NWA belt around his waist, despite not being the champion. The original finish was to see Flair's second, Roddy Piper, illegally help Flair retain. Plans changed after Piper tripped Veneno up from the outside, and then local soldiers pointed their guns at him, so the finish was switched up on the spur of the moment. A local newspaper described Jack reversing a Nature Boy suplex into a small package for the pin, whereas Flair, in his book, said that he pulled Veneno on top of him, and with the fans and soldiers looking to create bodies if Flair won, insisted on taking the fall. After taking the unplanned pinfall, Flair told Veneno to put the belt on while Invader number 1, Jose Gonzalez aka Bruiser Brody's murderer, ran to the ring and bum rushed both Flair and Piper out the stadium for their own safety. As for how they got the belt off of Veneno and back on Flair, well, Jack went on television and claimed he didn't want to be NWA champion as he preferred to stay on his beloved island. Job done. The NWA solution explaining Flair's title loss was to completely ignore it. So in this instance, this is kind of a clear title change regardless of the circumstances and should be counted towards the tally, bringing us up to 22. As an aside, Ric Flair wrote in his book that unlike many tens of thousands he made for the first match, or figures vary, he earned just $5,000 for the second match, while Roddy Piper was paid $500 and a spittoon full of cocaine. It's as close to a guarantee that neither of them got any sleep on the flight home. A few months after the Jack Veneno match that definitely didn't happen according to the NWA, Flair once again headed to the Caribbean islands, Puerto Rico to be specific, where local legend and World Wrestling Council owner Carlos Colon would be his opponent. It should be noted that the Colon Flair extravaganza had been promoted locally as a unification bout for Flair's NWA belt and Colon's WWC World Heavyweight Championship, suggesting that one of the participants was going to leave with both belts. Flair, by the way, had no advance knowledge of this arrangement. Colon won. How? Well, no one really seems quite to know for sure. And then Flair won the NWA World Heavyweight title back a couple of weeks later. How? No one really seems quite sure either. It's been suggested that Flair won the belt back in Florida a couple of weeks later, although no records of this exist, and it's possible that this is a phantom match that never happened to give Carlos a bit of a reason of why he no longer had the NWA belt. Flair and Carlos did indeed get a proper rematch later on that year in the fabled steel cage, with Colón once again emerging victorious, only this time the NWA title was not on the line. Flair's original loss to Colón was an obvious title change and the NWA ignored it, but you shouldn't. This brings our tally up to 23. Ric Flair clearly couldn't get enough of dropping his NWA World title in the Caribbean, as just a few weeks after losing and then magically regaining the NWA strap, Flair once again lost it to Victor Jovica. According to Flair, Jovica, who was a business partner with Carlos Colón, was an average wrestler who happened to be beloved in Trinidad only, which was strange because he was not native to the area but was in fact Croatian. According to Flair, the first match not only sold out, but they turned away 20,000 fans who rioted outside the stadium. Because no footage exists, details are vague, but the best people can come up with is that the NWA title switch was another last-second affair due to the crowd reaction, which saw Jovica pin Flair with his feet on the ropes. Jovica was stripped of the title after a few days, and the belt was awarded back to Flair. Does this constitute a legitimate title loss for Flair? Well, the true answer lays in the semantics. According to the book Wrestling Title Histories, the NWA Commission announced locally that the verdict was being overturned due to Jovica's feet being on the ropes and that Flair would remain NWA champion. If a verdict is overturned, rather than the title being vacated, the title change never happened. This was the rule with a lot of dusty finishes, and it shouldn't matter if the decision is overturned after 1 minute, or in this case, 3 days after the fact. Not a separate title reign, in our opinion. So now we're going to jump forward to 1993 when the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair is recognised as the first World Heavyweight Champion after the NWA withdrew support in September 1993. The big gold belt that formerly represented the NWA World title was thereafter referred to as the Big Gold Belt, before being repurposed as the WCW International World Heavyweight title. These name changes occurred while Flair held the belt. Some argue that Flair's winning the NWA World title from Barry Windham on July 18, 1993 at Beach Blast in Biloxi, Mississippi, and the belt being redesignated as a WCW sanctioned title constitutes separate reigns. For us, we say that this is one continuous reign with the belt name change, although having the belt's ownership transfer from the NWA to WCW makes this a more difficult call to make. The belt itself remained the same, but the company who owned it, and therefore renamed it, changed hands. Sometimes you have to go on gut feeling, as there's no real exact answers out there, but for us we're going to say no on this one. And that brings us to our final total of 23 reigns for the Nature Boy Ric Flair. So there you go, that's our answer. I mean, you've heard what we've got to say. What do you think about Ric Flair having, in our opinion, 23 separate title reigns? Are we right? Are we wrong? Do you still think it's 16 for some reason? Do you think it's 21? That's a lot that we've heard before. And some people even say it could be as much as 25 or 26 title reigns. Let us know in the comments what you think, and give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and we will see you in the next video. Woo!